Hello, YouTube. What is today? Today is, let me look down here. It's 3/26/23, about 4 days after the first day of spring, which I think was Monday. So, what are we talking about today? Got a pretty good volume there, huh? Pull this a little closer. Okay. So, there's only two ways to get rich. That's accidentally and accidentally on purpose. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, you can get rich accidentally, sort of through no fault of your own. If you say you hit the lottery for a big prize, or if a rich relative leaves you dies and leaves you an inheritance, so yeah, you can get rich accidentally. Or you can get rich accidentally on purpose. And what I mean by that is that you can plan, you can have a plan. For example, at the age of 32, I was, and I've mentioned this before, I was broke, and I define broke as having no savings. I was unemployed and had been for a while, and I was over $50,000 in debt. So how did that happen? Well, just I was basically financially illiterate. I had never read a book on financial planning or nothing. I was basically winging it, and I think a lot of people do just that, right? They just kind of wing it. But at the having found myself in that position at 32, I kind of realized I couldn't keep managing my money the way I had managed my money to that point and expect to achieve a different result. I think Einstein is the one who said that. You can't keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And so, now this was before the internet was what it is today. And so, when I decided I needed to learn about personal financial management, even though at that time I didn't even know enough to call it that, my only real resource was the library. So I went to the library, went in and asked the librarian there, "Hey, do you have any books about managing money?" And she said, "Sure." She walked me over to one section of the shelves and she said, in here there's a bunch of them. So I looked through there, and there was quite a few books, although they had different titles. And so what I did is I just grabbed three or four, and I went, checked them out, and I spent the next week or so reading them all. And took those back, read three more, took those back, read three more, until finally about 2 months later I had read myself through the entire shelf. And from what I learned in that, and there was a couple of things, one of them was, and I think the most important thing that came across in all those books I read was that you had to have a plan for every dollar you earned. And that included having a plan to save a certain percentage of what you earned. That is, to keep some of all the money you made. At the age of 32, I had not managed to do that, although by then I had been working for about 12 years. Whoops. And but I had managed to save some money, but the thing is, I'd also managed to spend it all and then some, because I was $50,000 in debt. So, another thing I read in all those books that seemed to be sort of a common thread was that you should pay yourself first. And what I mean by that is that the way most of us spend is we get our paycheck, we spend it, we get to our next paycheck, and if we have any money left over at the end of that first paycheck, that's that's basically our savings. So, and that's the opposite of the way you should actually manage your income. The way you should actually manage your income is you should save first and spend what's left. So, you know, I had been working for 12 years at that time for the federal government. And I realized that I needed to get back into the federal government because back then they still had what's known as a defined benefit program, which meant that after 30 years of employment, I would receive 65% of the average of my 3 highest years of income, and so I looked around where I was living at the time in San Diego. There weren't a lot of jobs open, especially I was looking for jobs as an electrician because I had gone through an apprenticeship program, and I was a journeyman electrician, and had even been a shop supervisor for a while. But so what I did was I called my brother because he knew a lot of people in San Diego, and I thought he might be able to ask around for me. And then he says, well, why don't you just come out to Washington, D.C.? He was living in Washington, D.C. at the time. He was a military officer stationed at the Pentagon. And he said, why don't you come out to D.C.? There's 300 federal jobs here in the Washington, D.C. metro area, and there's usually about 10% vacancies, which is 30,000 vacancies. And he says, you can find something. So that's what I did. I packed up all my possessions, which at the time was all fit into my Toyota standard cab pickup. It wasn't a king cab. It was just a standard cab, my guitar, and a box of some important documents, and then in the back some suitcases and stuff with my clothes and a few other belongings. But at the age of 32, that's all I had in the world. I'm telling you, sometimes I miss those days. But anyway. And the other thing I learned in this book is you had to have some sort of long-term plan for managing your finances, and you needed to have a budget. So I put a budget together and started paying myself first. And when I went to D.C., I found a job as an electrician pretty quickly. My brother was right; there was a lot of jobs, and a good electrician, I can always find a job fairly rapidly, and so I did. And so I put together a plan. I was saving. Every time I got a raise, I would put the entire raise towards my savings. So after a couple of years, I went from saving 10% to, through the process of budgeting and keeping my expenses as low as possible, I was saving about over 20% of everything I was earning, and my savings were piling up pretty good, and I was feeling good about my finances, and I got a better job. So I went from blue collar to white collar as a facility manager, also with the federal government. So by this time I had like 15 years in, so I was halfway to my 30. And so I now had a plan. So I was that's the purpose. I had a purpose now behind my finances and my planning and everything. I decided that I had 3 goals I wanted to accomplish. One, I wanted to achieve something which something that I'd read about in one of the books I read was the term financial independence. I wanted to be financially independent. I wanted to have $1 million net worth, and I wanted to be debt-free. And those are my 3 big goals by the time I was eligible for a pension. And so I had the plan. So there was a purpose for everything I did. So I had the purpose part. Now, where does the accidentally come in on the accidentally on purpose. Well, the truth of the matter is that you can exercise, some significant aspect of free will and your choices, and you can budget and you can manage your money and you can be thrifty and you can do all these things, but you have to be. There's also an aspect of what happens in your life that you can't control. And those are things like one of the biggest is your health. I mean, if your health goes, everything else goes with it, right? So you have to be lucky enough to stay healthy. I was looking at, like I said, another 15 years. So I had to be lucky enough to be healthy for 15 years. And as it turned out, I was lucky enough to be healthy for 15 years. The other thing I did is that when my brother left Washington, D.C., I decided I was going to go back to San Diego. I looked around to try and find a job to transfer, but my brother says, it's easier if you just go back and look from there. It's hard to get a job from far away because then you have to pay to go over there and interview and everything. So I quit again. I quit civil service again, federal civil service again, and I drove back across country. And it took me about 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, maybe about 5 months to find a job again. But again, that was luck. I could have easily have gone without finding a job back in federal civil service for 2 years. Now, if I had been more prudent, I probably would have found a job in the private sector as an electrician, because that's where I could most readily find a job. But I had, by then I had a certain amount of savings and I wasn't spending much. And so I had enough to rent an apartment and started applying for jobs. And after about 5 months, I got a job back. So that's another aspect of luck. My quitting civil service for the second time could have changed everything if I had not been able to eventually find that job in 5 months. Let's say it stretched out to 2 years or 3 years, or I had gotten it. That could have gone real wrong, because my planning was based on my doing my 30 years, and every month that ticked away meant at the back end I would have to add another month to how long I was employed, and I wanted to retire when I was 55, or I wanted to start drawing a pension. I wasn't sure what my retirement was going to look like. When I started drawing a pension, I would actually retire. I would only be 55, and I just wanted to do nothing. But I figured that out as I went along and as I got closer. And in fact, it may have been that I would want to, when I hit 55, take a year off or 2 years or whatever, particularly if I had achieved that goal of financial independence. But all along the way, things have to go right for you to achieve your goals. When you plan for your goals, that's the on purpose part of my phrase, accidentally on purpose. But things can definitely go wrong, things over which you have no control. Black swan events like, the pandemic we went through this is 2023. It started in 2020. For 22, there was lots of things shut down, things not happening, supply systems went wacky, and now we're entering into yet another phase. I watch a few channels on people who are planning for working towards financial independence, and one in particular, I think it's FI of Two Minds, where it has two guys. One's already FI and retired, and the other's savings towards financial independence. The guy who's saving towards financial independence, he's already changed the date by which he had previously projected he would achieve financial independence, because he was invested heavily in the stock market to achieve the kind of returns that had been happening during 20 and 21. But his portfolio had dropped 25%, I think. It was at least 20, because it was 20% across the board. But so, that kind of thing can happen too. If when you're planning for a goal that's far away, the higher the odds are that you can get knocked off track by circumstances or by black swan events like the pandemic we just went through, like the stock market losing 20% of its value, or like today is last week we had a couple of big banks fail, and there was a run on banks, and things like that can happen. So you can get rich accidentally without a plan, or you can get rich accidentally on purpose. And the question for you, and sort of the point of this video, is ask yourself, are you more likely to get rich accidentally, or more likely to get rich accidentally on purpose? And for me at least, it worked out and things went as planned accidentally on purpose. So, leave a comment. Let's start a discussion about this, and you might comment as to whether or not you actually have a plan, and if you are financially literate, or do you consider yourself financially literate? And if you're not, I'm hoping this video will give you some inspiration. And you have a lot more resources now. You have YouTube, you have blogs, you have, obviously there's still the library and a good old-fashioned book, but I'm of the opinion that YouTube videos aren't enough. They're just snippets. Even a 10-minute, 20-minute, 30-minute video is only a snippet, whereas you get a good book on the subject, and I'll be talking about that because that's one of the things that interests me a lot. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.